The story of the Chosen One begins thousands of years before his actual physical birth. The earliest known glimpses into the future itself being a concept of time that will prove useless in trying to understand the Force itself. From the Force's point of view, it is not entirely bound by space-time. But in the year that us mortals would name 3963 BBY, nearly 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, 3 Jedi Masters would look upon the monstrous being we know as Darth Vader. This vision was brought about via a masterful work of Sith alchemy in the form of the Myrrh Talisman, itself a perfect representation of this struggle between the dark and light. That second instance of a civil war between the ancient Jedi and the earlier Jedi orders. Originally, the Jedi had found ways to maintain balance in the Force, symbolized but also literally manifest in the 2 moons of Tython. The Ashla, which was rich in the energy of the light side, and Bogan, which radiated with darkness. The dark side was seen as destructive, which of course could mean mindless violence or disregard for nature, but holistically it meant transformation. Whereas the light side was seen as the natural way of things, which often could bring about the best through ways that seemed effortless, like a pure spring or fruit trees, but the Force itself seemed to have some aim, some goal in mind, a dynamic tension between these two that would end up growing the intellect, ability, and free will of those with a deeper connection to the Force, becoming co-engineers with the Force, improving this material plane. Anil Kesh, or the Temple of Science, would draw the most on the dark side, with the site itself over the chasm being another naturally rich dark side energy font. 2 different Jedi describe it thus: "We balance on the precipice of knowledge. The unknown lies below us, always threatening to draw us down or rise up and swallow us. The Force is charged and powerful here. Anyone familiar can feel and sense it, but if you're powerful with the Force, sometimes it hurts. But it's a hurt worth weathering." A quote from Dan Powell. And Lennery Brock would say, quote, "It is a mystery. It is depth and infinity on the surface of this world they deign to call their home. Its breath is warm and loaded, and deeper down through the mists of torrential rain, she can see the frequent flash of Force lightning, erupting the darkness and illuminating nothing. It is dizzying and thrilling, terrifying and wonderful." Part of these transformative studies eventually turned into alchemy. The so-called alchemy of the flesh was a branch that was already seen with suspicion by most other Jedi, and Master Dan Powell made a point to remind his students constantly that their art held great risk, saying to one class, quote, "Your future lies in the alchemy of flesh. I saw it in you the moment we met, and nothing had dissuaded me from that. It is a talent, for some, that lies on the edges of acceptability. It is a strong, challenging power, and you must be firmly balanced to attempt it. You must not let heavier desires tempt you. The dark side lurks close to what I do here, Lennery, and I am always vigilant. Don't be tempted, don't be drawn. Maintain your balance." Though Lennery Brock would take the art in a direction that would horrify her masters. By using her own blood and pieces of skin, she seems to have fallen just as her master warned, and through the darkness she would create a new form of life. A strange winged being flapping pathetically, looking at her through dim, milky eyes. She wondered if it had any sense of consciousness or connection to the Force. While others at Anil Kesh could make droids or other technological marvels, she had manipulated life itself. From the very beginning, in the tradition that preceded the Jedi and Sith themselves, the dark side had been trying to corrupt those with the gift of life into creating monstrosities made in their own image. Then an external force came in the form of the Rakatan Empire, which would prove such a threat to the Jedi Order that many found that calling on the Bogan, the Dark, gave them far more power. It was reasoned that this greater power should be wielded by those like the noble-minded Jedi. Evildoers across the stars were the norm throughout all recorded history. Those who did not even have a concept of morality or right and wrong, they simply lived by might makes right. And these Jedi warriors argued that this power should be wielded by those philosopher types who truly hoped in their hearts for peace, that there was clearly the will of the Force, as pacifists were quickly killed and no longer to partake in this transformative work in the galaxy. And more often than not, those who always thought themselves pacifists would eventually end up picking up weapons anyways. And while the Jedi Order would defeat the Rakata, in a sense, their order had been destroyed that day as well. There were increasingly harsh debates on the direction of the Order. At first, both sides were maintaining that they each wanted balance, and just differed on how that was lived out. But as is often the case, each side became more identified with the aspect that they felt the other was attacking. And so we see the start of cliques that now teach that any meddling in the Bogan leads to the ever-increasing violence and madness. That endless war was its ultimate aim. while with the other side, the Ashla was ridiculed as useless and thus a cruel illusion that works to kill its own adherents, only empowering those that wield evil. As masters watched their Padawans be drawn to the other side and killed in subsequent disputes, the Force Wars broke out. This civil war would see alchemy used by these Darksiders in horrific ways, and though the Bogan were said to be defeated, this year of 25,783 marked the end of the Jedi as well. Their enemy were people that they had lived with their whole lives, and in the trauma of this loss, they became radically against the idea of balance. There would be a complete rejection of the dark side, and it became seen as a poison so deadly that no amount of it should ever be tolerated. They saw the dark side as a force that would try to trick its way into Padawans, and there was a moral imperative to make sure that no Darksider teaching ever poisoned the minds of anyone ever again. But clearly, this was not the will of the Force. In the aftermath, the followers of the Ashla fled and traveled around as nomads in the Outer Rim for 730 years, until they established the Jedi Order on Ossus, and their models seemed to provide peace for thousands of years, until around 7000 BBY with the arrival of a man named Ajunta Pall. It is hard to keep reality out of existence, and can never be done indefinitely. After becoming a Jedi Master, Paul would discover the art of alchemy on his own, not pulling from any of the older sources, but the outcome would be the same. The highest-ranking Jedi were all quickly growing afraid of this new art, and he too created life like Brock some 18,000 years before. With this new discovery in the Force, and even examples of how this could be used to heal life, a new way to both do good and understand more fully all the powers of the Force, again the Elders struck this down, and demonized any who wished to dabble in these so-called dark arts. But by now, he had already grown a group of followers. With increasing persecution, more were forced to pick a side, and again, violence broke out, kicking off the 100-year darkness of this new Jedi Civil War. Deemed Dark Jedi, they fought hard until their ultimate defeat on Korbos. In this moment that proves how imbalanced the Jedi had become, they could not kill these Dark Jedi, even though by now the followers of Paul had created horrific beasts via their alchemy. The Jedi Council believed that they were driven mad. They were bloodthirsty, mindless conduits that allowed themselves to be possessed by the dark side. They had killed countless innocent people, and were seen as evil made flesh, and yet the Jedi would not kill these captured enemies. They wouldn't even detain them indefinitely. Instead, due to a twisted form of toxic sympathy, they released this plague into the galaxy, all because they had become such idolaters of the light side. They could no longer act practically in the world, and do this one small act of transformation, or darkness, and just kill these Dark Jedi. Put an end to this violent new movement, and then figure out ways to reform the Jedi Order and try and learn from the mistakes. Instead, the Dark Jedi were exiled to the Outer Rim, where they would eventually find Korriban, home to the ultra-violent and highly Force-sensitive species known as the Sith. The Force would do what the Jedi seemed incapable of, and established a path to ultimately defeating these dark side worshippers once and for all by using the hyper-violence and backstabbing nature of the Sith Lords as the ultimate means to destroy them. They were called the Exiles, and some of the most notable were Zozan, Remulus Drapa, Sorza Sin, Karnus Mur, and of course Ajunta Pall himself. And they stunned the native Sith with their dark side powers. The Sith called them Gen Jedi, meaning Dark Jedi in their language. The Exiles quickly made an alliance with the Sith rulers second in command, and used that connection to eventually overthrow and kill the king. Ajunta Pall personally beheaded him and claimed the throne, presenting himself as a descendant of the legendary King Assad. Once in power, the Dark Jedi declared themselves living gods, and the Sith, now their subjects, worshipped them as such. They adopted the title Lords of the Sith, with their ruler known as the Jennari, Dark Lord of the Sith. To impress their followers, they wore elaborate clothing and ordered the construction of massive temples and tombs in their honor. During their reign, the Sith Lords constantly battled each other for dominance, developing deadly new weapons created by the dark side. One of the most infamous was the Mur Talisman, created by Karnus Mur, a master of Sith alchemy. Mur may have even played a role in creating the Leviathan during the 100-Year Darkness. His talisman could transform humans into monstrous creatures called rat ghouls, which he could also control. Though he found that aliens and Force sensitives were immune, so he engineered the rat ghoul plague, allowing the infection to spread to those his talisman couldn't directly control. Eventually, his rival, Remulus Drapa, designed an oubliette to imprison Mur, along with his talisman and the plague. But Before he could be captured, Mur was killed and his talisman vanished, only to resurface on Taurus millennia later under mysterious circumstances. Many Sith Lords, including Naga Sadow, fought fiercely to find and claim the Mur talisman for themselves, but it was never recovered, almost as if the Force itself was keeping it hidden. At some point, its last known owner was killed in a cave-in deep in the undercity of Taurus, where the talisman remained buried for centuries, infecting the outcasts with the Rakghoul Plague. By 3963 BBY, the Jedi Covenant suspected the talisman was still somewhere in Taurus's undercity. Jedi Master Zamar of the First Watch Circle was actively searching for it, but his mission was cut short when he had to flee the planet after Zane Carrick's escape. Here the concept of time bends, as strangely, thousands of years before Anakin Skywalker was even born, he appeared in visions as Darth Vader, the Sith Lord he would one day become. Later, after the Mandalorians invaded Taurus, the Covenant had another disturbing vision, linking the talisman to a coming disaster involving Zane, Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, and Cade Skywalker. The fact that this vision occurred to the Covenant and had these 4 particular victims of a seemingly preordained tragedy must be the Force trying to show the true depths of its plans, because the Covenant was a secret society within the Jedi Order, which was hell-bent on making sure the Sith would never rise again. This secretive Jedi group was based on Coruscant during the time of the Old Sith Wars, and it was founded after the Great Sith War by Crinda Dre, who blamed herself for failing to foresee Exar Kun's fall to the dark side. It's Jedi trying to take accountability for and prevent the fact that all of these evil Sith who go about to eventually kill millions of innocent people across the galaxy were once Jedi. Their mission was simple but extreme. They used Jedi consulars as shadows to hunt for any sign, any shatter point that could signal the return of the Sith, and they were willing to do whatever it took to stop it. The Covenant despised the Sith with an intensity that actually went against the Jedi Code, but their point is very understandable. When billions keep dying due to wars involving Force wielders, it was the Jedi's responsibility to end the Sith, this splinter group that rose from their order and could have been ended before they even took the name Sith Lord if they had just been killed or detained by those ancient Jedi. They believed that if this group had existed earlier, they could have identified Exar Kun as a threat while he was still a Jedi and prevented the Sith War altogether. So this Force vision via the Mur talisman shows that some things cannot be prevented, for even if they seem to us like a great evil, they do serve some future purpose beyond our understanding or power, as this vision shows that there will be those students of the light who keep being drawn to the dark far into the future. By around 1032 BBY, Darth Bane would put an end to the Sith Empire and establish the rule of 2. One Sith to embody the power, the other to crave it. In secret, they could achieve their goals more effectively, and there are many ways that the corruption and chaos, the strength of the pirates and thugs and separatist factions that grew over 1,000 years could be traced back to the machinations of Sith Lords. From the time that Bane took his first apprentice, Zana, to the invasion of Naboo in 32 BBY, when the Sith would make their reintroduction to the galaxy, showing that they had never died, and the pieces were already moved into place. The Phantom Menace had never stopped haunting the Jedi. And though Bane's designs would set up the political landscape for the Sith to play in, it was Tenebrous and ultimately his apprentice Plagueis who could be seen as pushing Sith power so far that the Force had to actively intervene. Before 67 BBY, the Sith Lord Darth Tenebrous used his ability to sense the flow of the future and saw the arrival of the prophesied Chosen One who would later be Anakin Skywalker. He had a plan. When the Chosen One was still young and vulnerable, Tenebrous would take over his body, effectively being reborn and ensuring his rule over the galaxy forever. To make this possible, he experimented with midichlorians, transforming them into maxichlorians, so that he could possess his apprentice Darth Plagueis after his own death. When Plagueis eventually killed him on Beldemnik, Tenebrous's consciousness secretly took over his apprentice's body. The plan had worked, or so he thought. Once actually inside, he was able to see through Plagueis' foresight and made a horrifying realization. Plagueis would die long before the Chosen One was even born. Panicked, Tenebrous abandoned Plagueis, only to find himself trapped as a disembodied presence, a sort of dark side ghost stuck at the place of his death. By 42 BBY, Plagueis and his apprentice, Darth Sidious, had spent months in deep meditation, shifting the cosmic balance of the Force toward the dark side. Plagueis was obsessed with controlling midichlorians, the microscopic life forms that allowed beings to connect to the Force. He experimented relentlessly, even managing to resurrect Darth Venemus, a Bith that he had been using as a test subject for years, able to keep him animated purely through the power of the Force. Emboldened by his success, Plagueis took things further. He reached out across the galaxy, attempting to dominate all midichlorians and bend them to his will, but the Force resisted. In response, the midichlorians acted on their own and, defying Plagueis, conceived a child within the human slave woman, Shmi Skywalker. The implications here are mind-bending, as the Force provided glimpses of what seems to be a determined future, and yet in another sense is still reacting to specific actions, allowing Plagueis to use his free will to try and bring the entire galaxy under his will, to forever destroy this balance, and like how the Jedi only wanted light, he would see a galaxy ruled only by the dark side. And yet in doing this, it causes the Force, for the first time in history, to directly bring about the one that would destroy this power. Anakin Skywalker was born to Shmi in 42 BBY. By 38 BBY, he was nearly 4 years old when he and his mother were sold to the Hutt Gardula Basadi and taken to Tatooine on a crowded freighter. The passengers weren't even told where they were going, and to make things even worse, the ship's only refresher backed up during the flight, making the trip miserable and memorable. During the journey, Anakin had a vivid premonition of pod racing, seeing himself as an older man speeding across Tatooine's flats. His mother woke him from the dream as they landed, and they were brought before Gardula and her aides. While they stood in a line, a gunshot rang out nearby. Unlike everyone else who ducked for cover, Anakin watched as an Arcana slave tried to escape, only for his transmitter to detonate, killing him instantly. That moment made it painfully clear to Anakin what would happen if he ever tried to run. Not long after, he was implanted with his own slave transmitter, and in Mos Espa, he and his mom shared cramped quarters with 6 other slaves under Gardula's ownership. Despite all the hardships, having his mother with him helped Anakin endure slavery with a surprisingly positive attitude. Even though he wasn't fond of Tatooine, he was eager to learn everything he could about it. He listened to spacers and Gardula's attendants, absorbing knowledge about the planet's history and its place in the galaxy. He learned about the brutal Tusken Raiders, the scavenging Jawas, and the legendary Krayt Dragons. But what fascinated him most was pod racing, which lined up exactly with the vision he had on the freighter. Still, he longed to leave Tatooine one day, dreaming of seeing Coruscant, the heart of the Republic. While enslaved by Gardula, Anakin became friends with 2 fellow slaves, Kitster Chanchani Banai, a human, and Pala Quitexa, a Twi'lek. Even after they were sold to different owners, they remained close since they all still lived in Mos Espa. A few months later, Anakin was outside repairing a vaporator when he decided to improve it instead. His work caught the eye of Watto, a Toydarian junk dealer who often gambled with Gardula on pod races. Impressed by Anakin's skill, Watto bet against Gardula for ownership of the Skywalkers and won. 2 days later, Anakin and his mother became Watto's property. He started working at Watto's shop as a mechanic. While Watto wasn't exactly kind, he did allow the Skywalkers to move into a small hovel in Mos Espa's Slave Quarters Row. Though he made it clear that if they disobeyed him, he'd make them share their home with other slaves once he could afford to buy more. Anakin didn't mind the work though. He loved tinkering with machines. His room was filled with tools, half-built projects, and a workbench where he was always building or fixing something. From a young age, Anakin showed signs of being special. He could sense things before they happened, picked up on people's emotions, and had incredible reflexes, all early signs of Force sensitivity. Watto thought he could put this to use in the pod races, a sport no other human had even survived, let alone excelled at. Only Shmi knew just how gifted her son truly was. By the age of 9, Anakin was strong, fast, and an expert pilot, while being a prodigy in mathematics and engineering. At Watto's junk shop, Anakin was the go-to person for fixing the unfixable. Over time, he got to know many Mos Espa locals, picked up different alien languages, and even taught himself how to operate starships by practicing in abandoned cockpits he found in the junkyard. His reputation for building and repairing anything quickly grew. Around 34 BBY, Anakin secretly began constructing his own pod racer, using scrap parts he salvaged from junkyards. He worked on restoring an old pod racer cockpit and a pair of Radon Olzer 620C racing engines. To keep Watto from taking it, he purposely left it looking like a broken mess under a tarp. Meanwhile, Watto gave Shmi an aero magnifier in order to clean computer memory devices, allowing them to earn a small income. But Anakin never gave up on his dream of freedom. He even started working on a scanner that could locate the transmitter in his body, hoping to one day find it and remove it. Around 34 BBY, when Anakin was 7, Watto left for Anchorhead to bid on parts from a crashed ship. leaving the boy with a long list of chores. Instead of doing them all by hand, Anakin cleverly programmed the shop's droid to finish by midday. With the free time, he grabbed a pack his mother had filled with meat pies and fruit and met his friend Ami for a picnic. They found a quiet spot in a small canyon near a strange tree with flickering leaves, and they shared the food made by their mothers. When they returned to Mos Espa, the streets were nearly deserted. From their neighbors, they learned that the pirate Crane had raided the city, capturing several slaves and overriding their transmitters. Terrified for his mother, Anakin sprinted home and was relieved to find Shmi safe. But Ami's mother, Hala, had been taken. Their master, Yor Milto, brushed off her abduction as a mere nuisance, which enraged Anakin. He vowed to remember every detail of that day, especially the fear on his mother's face, to fuel his fight against slavery and his dream of freeing others like him. A year later, in 33 BBY, Anakin met a retired pilot who told him about the moons of Iago and the mysterious angels said to live there. That same year, while searching through Watto's junkyard, Anakin stumbled across an ancient battle droid. Curious, he dragged it behind the shop and secretly powered it up when Watto wasn't looking. The droid was too rusted to function properly, but its hollow projector managed to display a chaotic, damaged recording, one showing a battle involving the Sith. Disturbed, Anakin later ran into the retired pilot and asked him about the Sith. The pilot panicked, thinking Anakin was saying that the Sith had returned. But realizing the boy didn't actually know who they were, the pilot explained the history of the Sith Order and the new Sith Wars, a 1,000-year conflict between the Jedi and Sith. He also mentioned the lingering rumors that some Sith had survived their supposed extinction. As Anakin continued racing for Watto, he regularly lost to Sebulba, a Dug racer notorious for cheating. Then in 32 BBY, Anakin was in Watto's shop when his best friend Kitster arrived with exciting news. Sebulba and another pod racer, Gasgano, had just landed in Mos Espa. Kitster convinced Watto to let Anakin check out the spaceport by suggesting there might be a mysterious crate aboard Sebulba's freighter. When they arrived, a crowd had already gathered to watch the racers unload their equipment. Anakin studied Gasgano's pod racer, but immediately sensed that nothing significant had been changed. Sebulba's, however, caught his attention, specifically the newly installed Kuat 40Z stabilizers. Nearby, their friend Paula Kwiatkowska had a different story to share. She said that she had been sold to the pirate Lord Tantos, who was training her as an assassin. Saddened and angry, Anakin wanted to learn more about Tantos, hoping to find a way to help his friend, but then he realized that he had forgotten to check out the mysterious crate being moved to a secure warehouse. Kwiatkowska and the other kids created a distraction to lure away the Gamorrean guards at the warehouse door. While they caused chaos, Anakin and Kitster slipped inside. The crate wasn't holding pod racer parts, it was an energy cage containing a group of kidnapped children. One girl, named Princess Arani, explained that they were ghostlings from the planet Datar and begged them for help. At first, Anakin hesitated, knowing that if they had transmitters, there was little he could do. But when Arani told him that they hadn't been implanted yet, the situation changed. But before they could act, a Dug named Kiss stormed into the warehouse and opened fire on them, thinking they were trying to free the slaves. Anakin and Kitster, cloaked in hoods, dodged into the shadows and escaped through another entrance. They ran back to Watto's shop and reported on Sebulba's pod racer, but Anakin kept quiet about the ghostlings. Dismissing Kitster, Watto gave Anakin a new task, to travel into the Junlan Wastes and barter with a tribe of Jawas. Anakin took his sand skimmer and rode out for several hours until he reached the market, a towering rock formation where hundreds of Jawa sand crawlers gathered in its shadow. There, he would have to negotiate with the scavengers, one of the many skills he had picked up in his years as a slave. While he searched through the endless piles of junk laid out by the Jawas, Anakin quickly found the parts he needed and negotiated a good price. But instead of heading straight back to Mos Espa, he decided to wait until nightfall. To save money, so he could buy a gift for Kwiatkowska before she left Tatooine, he settled for a simple hubba gourd to satisfy his hunger and thirst. While exploring the junkyard, Anakin spotted a Jawa selling a large Radon Ulcer pod racer engine. He immediately saw its potential. It could help him fix his own pod racer, but the Jawa refused to trade and demanded full payment in cash. Frustrated, he turned back to his sand skimmer when something else caught his eye. An old Jawa offering a pile of random trinkets, including a small, ancient-looking cube that fit perfectly in his hand. Examining the cube, Anakin noticed strange symbols and images on its side. 2 Jedi battling, a star map, and a lamp pierced by a knife, a symbol of forbidden knowledge. As he studied it, he felt something dark about the object. Uneasy, he put it back, but the Jawa offered to sell it for 3 whoopie, the exact amount Anakin had left. Despite his gut telling him otherwise, he bought the cube and returned to Mos Espa. Though no matter what he tried, he couldn't open it. When he got home, he was surprised to find his mother still awake, fixing a maintenance droid. Shmi explained that she was helping her sick friend Mata finish her repair quota, so she wouldn't be sold by her master Dengula. Anakin stayed up to help, but his mind kept drifting back to the ghostling children in Quitexa, wondering how he could save them. The next day, Kitster and the Bothan slave Dorn, both owned by Gardula the Hutt, came to Anakin with Paula. They had hacked into Gardula's systems and found something horrifying. She planned to use the ghostlings as living lawn ornaments in her underground pleasure garden. The delicate children wouldn't survive in that environment for more than a year. Disgusted, Anakin agreed to help break them out. As the sun set, the group donned Jawa robes and used the dusk shadows to approach Gardula's fortress unnoticed. Kitster led them through a narrow chasm, but before they reached the fortress, a massive cliff borer worm attacked, slipping into the fortress undetected through a ventilation grate. Once inside, things quickly fell apart. Kitster got separated and was forced to stay with Gardula in her pool room, leaving the others to find the dungeons alone. Dorn scouted ahead while Anakin and Quitexca waited. When Kitster narrowly avoided being eaten, the fortress erupted into chaos. A Gamorrean guard spotted Anakin and gave chase, forcing him and Quitexca to flee deeper into the fortress. Unknowingly, Anakin led them straight into the security control room. As the security chief reached for the alarm, Anakin fired his ion blaster, knocking out the controls. Quitexca slammed the door shut just as the chief fired his weapon. The blaster bolt ricocheted and hit him instead. The group reunited at the slave infirmary. When they opened the door, they came face to face with a massive Abyssin. Thinking fast, Anakin bluffed, telling him that they were replacement guards for the ghostlings. The Abyssin bought the lie and left, clearing the way for their next move. But in the rush, the group accidentally locked themselves inside the infirmary. That's when Princess Arani suggested a risky plan, using a box of bomb transmitters to blow open the door. The plan worked. They gathered the ghostlings, leading them toward the open hangar. Realizing they had no way to get them out safely yet, the group decided to hide the children in Gardula's pleasure garden and return for them later. Slipping away, Anakin used the remaining transmitters to collapse the passage behind him, destroying a seeker droid and a squad of battle droids in the process. With their escape route covered, the group slipped back to Mos Espa, returning home before anyone noticed they were gone. The next day, Watto berated Anakin for being sluggish, and in response, Anakin showed him the mysterious cube he had bought in the Jawa market. Surprisingly, Watto let him go home early for a nap. On his way back, Anakin ran into Kitster, Dorn, and Quitexca, who delivered the bad news. Gardula's security had a sample of Quitexca's skin, meaning it was only a matter of time before she was identified as one of the fortress intruders. The elderly Jira took them into her apartment, scolding them for getting involved in freeing the slaves. But she revealed that she knew a smuggler willing to take the ghostlings off-world for a high price. Anakin quickly volunteered to build a signal jammer to keep Quitexca from being tracked. Splitting off from his friends, he rushed back to Watto's shop to put it together. But as he was returning to meet them, he got an eerie sense that he was being followed. Dorn confirmed his suspicion, pulling him aside and pointing out a Sakian tracker, the Jas Pur, and his seeker droids scanning the crowd for him. Thinking fast, Anakin threw on a Jawa robe and slipped into the crowd of Jawas, while Dorn distracted Pur. Meanwhile, Quitexca sabotaged the seeker droid by dumping Gano juice on it, blocking its olfactory sensors. Anakin grabbed his goggles from Watto's pod racer and, following Kitster's advice, stole Sebulba's pod racer as a getaway vehicle. As the seeker droid tried to stop him, Anakin dodged its stun darts and managed to destroy it by catching it between the pod racer's energy binders. He then smashed through the hangar doors, accidentally snaring the Dug Kiss on one of the stabilizers in the process. When Kiss tried to climb towards the cockpit, Anakin panicked and flipped a random lever, which vented a burst of flame from the engine, sending Kiss flying. Before he could celebrate, Sebulba himself took off after him in Brant Rumble's pod racer. The Dug was out for blood, planning to ram Anakin's pod racer and kill him. Anakin signaled to Kitster to jump off with the signal jammer, then tried to outrun Sebulba. But something was wrong. His throttles weren't responding quickly, and Anakin realized that Sebulba's pod racer had reinforced engines, designed for ramming rather than speed. He needed to outmaneuver him. Dodging blaster fire, Anakin figured out that Sebulba was protecting his own pod racer. So he tossed Sebulba's own goggles and hydrospanner into the intake of Brant Rumble's pod racer. The tools got stuck into the engine, causing a massive explosion, allowing Anakin to escape and return to Jiro's apartment, where Kitster, Dorn, and Jiro were waiting. Kitster had hidden Quitexca with the ghostlings, and the three pooled their money for the smuggler's fee. But when Anakin got home, Shmi confronted him. Though she didn't say it outright, she knew he had been part of the break-in. and that night, Anakin dreamed of a dark voice commanding him to open the cube. Waking suddenly, he was convinced the voice was real, and noticed that the cube was warm, almost like a living thing. The next day, Jira confirmed that the smugglers would arrive at sunset to pick up Kwiatkowska and the Ghostlings. But that night, Dorn contacted Anakin with terrible news. His master, Jabba the Hutt, had ordered him to track down Kwiatkowska. Dismayed, Anakin told Dorn to meet him at noon for a signal jammer. Before falling asleep, he had a dream, one of a man with intense eyes, a lightsaber, and a tan poncho, coming to take him away from Tatooine. The next morning, Anakin rushed to meet Dorn, but noticed Sebulba and his crew hunting for the Bothan. After slipping Dorn the jammer, Anakin incited a bar fight at the Racer's Edge Cantina, forcing Sebulba and the hunters to get caught up in the chaos while Dorn escaped. Later, Anakin, Kitster, and Dorn disguised themselves and set out for Gardulla's fortress, but Djas Pur, Sebulba, and other hunters followed them. Once inside the pleasure garden, the hunters attacked, separating the children. Anakin managed to trap the Abyssin Gondry in Quickclay, but before he could escape, Sebulba caught up. Running, Anakin stumbled across a Merc SS-23 sewage cannon and fled into the bushes only to find Dorn unconscious nearby. As Anakin tried to wake him, a small, glowing green Wisty appeared and led him straight to the Ghostlings and Kwiatkowska, just as Djas Pur captured them. The Wisty urged him to run, and though it tore at him, Anakin fled the garden, leaving his friends and the Ghostlings in Pur and Sebulba's hands. When Anakin reached Mos Espa, he ran straight to Jira and told her everything that had happened. At the same time, an announcement rang out. A slave execution was scheduled for that evening. Jira suggested that Anakin leave with the smugglers, fearing for his safety, but she also regretfully admitted that she hadn't been able to gather enough money for all the Ghostling children to escape. Anakin refused to leave without his mother and told Jira to be ready at sunset. Determined to rescue his friends, he sold valuable junk from his room and used the money to buy glow rods, sand masks, and a handheld beam drill before heading to the Mos Espa Grand Arena where his friends were being held. Sneaking into an unguarded holding pen, Anakin crawled through a large drain and found his friends. Quickly, he freed them and ushered them into a sand draining system just as the guard sounded the alarm. As they fled through the underground drain pipes, Anakin passed out sand masks while Dorn led the way with a glow rod, and Anakin followed at the rear with another. They made their way toward the pod racer hangar, fending off capture droids with Anakin's ion blaster. But before they could escape, sand began pouring into the tunnels, sweeping the group forward in a torrent of sand. Anakin barely managed to hold onto his glow rod when a rockwart tried to snatch it from him, but when they finally came to a stop, they found themselves in a large catch basin. Determined to find a way out, Anakin set off alone, using his beam drill to ward off Womp Rats and mark his path. At one point, he nearly got caught by two more Syrian pirates, who heard him through the grates. Anakin waited for them to leave and then raided their storeroom, stealing enough treasure to pay for the Ghostlings' escape. After searching the grates and tunnels, Anakin finally convinced a slave to open a grate in his house, allowing the Ghostlings and his friends to escape. But just as they got out, Anakin learned that Dorn and an unconscious Ghostling Cornel had been separated from the group by the slave hunters. But the plan was still in motion. Everyone was supposed to meet at Bantha Rock, where the smuggler would be waiting. Using Watto's landspeeder, Anakin ferried the Ghostlings and his friends out of the city, dodging slave hunters until they finally reached Bantha Rock, and Kitster recognized the smuggler. It was his own father, Rakir Banai. Rakir accepted Anakin's payment and loaded the children into the ship, but Anakin refused to leave. He would not abandon his mother. Just then, Dorn and Cornel arrived, but Rakir had bad news. His ship's life support systems couldn't handle that many people. One of them had to stay behind. Without hesitation, Kitster volunteered to give up his place, since he wasn't being hunted by Gardulla's thugs. Anakin, Kitster, and Jiro watched from a distant plateau as the ship lifted off, just as Sebulba and the hunters arrived. Jiro handed the boys the remaining money, and Anakin decided to save it, hoping that one day he would buy his freedom. When he got home, he found his mother was still awake, working late again. When Anakin offered to help, Shmi refused, simply telling him to clean himself up. Knowing that her young boy was truly unique, destined for some heroic future. 2 days later, Anakin raced Watto's pod racer again, but during the race, Sebulba used his exhaust vents to send Anakin flying out of control, again crashing Watto's racer. Then while Anakin was working at Watto's shop, his owner kicked W. Wald and another child out, then left to meet with Jabba the Hutt. As soon as Watto was gone, Anakin let them back in, and the kids started exploring the shop. Wad got excited when he found what he thought was a lightsaber, a weapon of the Jedi Knights. Before they could examine it further, a passerby interrupted them, saying that Sebulba's new pod racer had just arrived. Curious, the kids snuck over to check it out, and while Sebulba wasn't looking, they opened his engines, and Anakin quickly spotted a vertigo flux override inside. But before they could do anything else, Wald accidentally dropped the lightsaber into the open hatch. Anakin barely pulled it out in time, just as an angry Sebulba stormed over. He had no idea that the weapon had already damaged the pod racer's inner workings. The kids ran back to Watto's shop, but when Watto returned and saw them, he kicked Wald and the other boy out again. Later, in Sebulba's next race, his pod racer malfunctioned and crashed. The result of this unintentional sabotage, and this loss meant that Watto won his bet with Jabba and kept his shop. Sometime later, while chatting with Kitster in the junkyard, Anakin stumbled across a broken 3PO series protocol droid chassis. The droid was clearly old and worn out, but Anakin was confident he could restore it. Though he wasn't sure what he'd use it for, he smuggled the pieces home little by little, making sure Watto didn't notice. When Shmi saw it, she was skeptical, explaining that protocol droids weren't useful for their kind of work. But Anakin insisted that the droid could help with chores and translate alien languages, and eventually this convinced her. But she made it clear that C-3PO would be his responsibility alone. To Anakin, the droid felt like a kindred spirit, perhaps another slave who tried to escape and had been broken in the process. He decided to name him C-3PO, and he liked to think that the 3 could represent him being the third member of their little family. A few days later, Anakin dreamed that he won a pod race and was greeted in the winner's circle by a wise man and an angel. When his mother woke him for breakfast, he told her about the dream and later shared it with Kitster on the way to Watto's shop. That day, Watto sent Anakin to Machot Steep to retrieve thrusters from the wreckage of Rega the Hammerhead's pod racer. While searching through Watto's junk for tradable items, Anakin found a vaporator cylinder and had a strange feeling that it would be important, so he kept it. Picking up C-3PO to serve as translator, Anakin headed out to barter with the Jawas, but they refused his offers, demanding either money or his water pouches. Then Anakin realized their vaporator was broken, so he offered to fix it in exchange for the thrusters. The grateful Jawas agreed, giving him not only the thrusters, but also the remains of the pod, which included an intact engine. Excited, Anakin decided to save the engine for his own secret pod racer, and when he got back to Watto's shop, Watto ordered him to install the thrusters the next morning, as he planned for Anakin to race his pod racer in an upcoming competition. On race day, Sebulba smugly warned Anakin that he had a surprise waiting for him in Bimara Canyon. But Anakin got there before Sebulba, staying ahead until Sebulba and Rimkar managed to pass him. As the race continued, Sebulba used his afterburners to destroy Rimkar's pod in Meta Canyon, causing Anakin to lose control and crash as well. Furious, Watto ordered Anakin to repair the pod racer immediately. And that night, Kitster and Wald convinced Anakin to take a break, and the 3 went out for Ruby Bleals, which was a delicious sort of gooey drink. They were talking about starfighters when the retired pilot who had told Anakin about Iago had overheard their conversation. Impressed by Anakin's racing skills, he joined them. The pilot brought the boys more drinks and told them stories about his time in the Republic Starfighter Corps, describing other planets and Jedi Knights. The boys were so caught up in the stories that Anakin arrived home late for dinner, earning a scolding from Shmi. When Shmi once again objected to his racing, Anakin reminded her that Watto forced him to do it. A little over a week later, with C-3PO's intelligence and communication processors finally repaired, Watto sent Anakin back to Mochet Steep for another trade with the Jawas. There he would barter for several mechanic droids, multi-purpose droids, and a damaged hyperdrive converter. On the way back, he drove towards Zelric Draw Canyon, a rugged pass along the edge of the Dune Sea. But along the way, he spotted an injured Tusken Raider. The Tusken's leg was trapped under a boulder, and for several tense minutes, the two just stared at each other. Finally, Anakin made a decision. He used the droids to free the Tusken. By the time they succeeded, night was falling, so Anakin decided to camp for the night, setting up a glow unit. 3PO attempted to speak to the Tusken, but the warrior remained hostile and cautious. The next morning, Anakin woke up to find that a group of Tuskens had surrounded him and the droids, but instead of attacking, they reclaimed their injured kin and left in peace. Perhaps in that moment there was a chance that Anakin could have seen the Tuskens as more than just brutal savages. The next day, Anakin was working in Watto's junkyard, trying to repair some machinery, when a womp rat triggered one of Watto's snares. Startled, Anakin hit his head on the machine just as his friend Ami arrived to witness the mishap. Realizing the womp rat was just a baby, Anakin freed it and went back to searching for pod racer parts. As they continued, the two suddenly saw a herd of banthas stampeding past Mos Espa, a sure sign that a sandstorm was approaching. Just as Anakin was about to return to Watto's shop, the same womp rat appeared, sitting on top of what Anakin quickly recognized as an energy binder. After shooing the creature away, he grabbed the valuable part for his pod racer and raced back to the shop. So whether it was through the accidental damage to Sebulba's racer, which allowed Watto to win his bet and keep the shop, or these acts of kindness towards a Womp Rat, then have that rat deliver these parts to Anakin, through these seemingly small actions, the Force was trying to bring about its ultimate will. Back at the shop, Watto ordered Anakin to go to the market and trade with a group of Jawas who had salvaged parts from Anakin's crashed pod racer. Before heading out, he handed the energy binder to his mother for safekeeping. And at the market, he ran into Walden Kitster, who snuck up on him and talked him into stopping for Ruby Bleals at Maggie the Grogan's cantina. Before heading inside, he also picked up fruit for his mother from Jira's stall, promising the old woman that he'd help her fix her broken cooling unit soon. Just outside the cantina, they ran into Sebulba, but before the Dug Racer could start trouble, that old retired Republic pilot appeared. His appearance was enough to make Sebulba back off, and Anakin quickly took the chance to ask the pilot if he would tell him more about the Angels next time they meet. When Anakin and his friends finally reached the Jawas, they arrived too late. The parts Watto wanted had already been sold to a pit droid. Frustrated, Anakin returned to Watto's shop, where he was ordered to clean the junk bins as punishment. A few days later, while exploring the junkyard, Anakin sees the same Womp Rat again. This time, the creature led him to an intact cooling unit, just what Jira needed. As he looked up to the sky, he saw a starship passing overhead, and for a moment, he drifted into daydreams of Jedi and angels. His thoughts were cut short when Watto's voice rang out, ordering him back inside. When Anakin entered the shop, he saw 4 strangers talking to Watto. A tall man, a young woman, a Gungan, and an astromech. At Watto's instruction, Anakin took over manning the shop while Watto led the man, Qui-Gon Jinn, into the junkyard. But Anakin couldn't take his eyes off the young woman. To him, she was the most beautiful person he had ever seen. Climbing onto the counter, he blurted out the first thing that came to mind.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel. I heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe. They live on the moons of Viego, I think.
The young woman laughed and introduced herself as Padme Nabiri, just as the Gungan, Jar Jar Binks, accidentally activated a dumb series pit droid, sending it rampaging through the shop. As Padme and Anakin laughed, he quickly instructed Binks to hit the droid on the nose, deactivating it. In that moment, Anakin decided that one day he would marry her. Just then, Watto and Qui-Gon returned, and the Jedi Master said they were leaving. Watto let Anakin go home after he cleaned up the mess Jar Jar had made, and on his way, Anakin spotted Sebulba attacking Jar Jar, furious over his clumsy antics. Without hesitation, Anakin stepped in and broke up the fight, just as Padme and the rest of her group arrived. After greeting them, Anakin led them to Jira's fruit stand, where he told the old woman about the cooling unit he had found, and then they bought 4 pallies. And just for a moment, Anakin caught a glimpse of something hidden beneath the Jedi's poncho, a lightsaber. The shock hit him instantly, but he masked his reaction. He had heard stories of the Jedi, but seeing a real lightsaber confirmed his suspicions. Qui-Gon Jinn was a Jedi Knight. When Jira suddenly warned them about the incoming sandstorm, Anakin insisted that the group come with him to his house, knowing they were unprepared for the brutal weather. And so we see cosmic events dating back to the time before the Jedi and Sith, causing the countless wars over thousands of years, to the peak of Sith ambitions when Darth Plagueis tried to forever upset the balance of light and dark. The Force itself was in motion, everything from the major scale of giving birth to Anakin himself, to the countless seeming coincidences, from winning bets, befriending animals, and even the sandstorm itself, all driving these characters towards this ultimate end that the Force has planned. This ends part 1, and I hope to see everybody in part 2, which is coming soon. Please hit that like button, it really does help. Subscribe so you don't miss anything, and check out these other videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, only the Force can truly understand the Force, and the Force will be with you, always.